And welcome back to Primility Primer, our morning reminder of the power of balancing pride and humility as we go about our daily lives. This is episode number 29. I am your host, Jared Morris. And today I want to talk about something that I learned from a recent article in Entrepreneur Magazine that I read on the plane while traveling back from vacation a couple of days ago. And it's about the craft beer industry. And I found it really, really interesting how a spirit of collaboration and really a sense of pride in humility is really what has helped drive the growth in craft beer, along with some other factors. But this sense of having pride in a sense of humility has really helped drive the growth in the craft beer industry over the last 6 years. So, an interesting stat is that beer sales in America have been relatively stagnant for the last 5 or 6 years. Yet, craft beer sales have grown by 22%. So what is it that is leading craft beer to continue, craft breweries to continue to gobble up more and more of the market share? Well, I think this line right here, this quote really sums it up. And the quote is, "Craft brewers open their doors to others. They share equipment and help train one another's staffs. Trade secrets, craft brewers take pride in having none." They take pride and having none. Again, this taking pride and having a sense of humility, because what's happened, kind of the basic history, is that in the late 70s, a law that was established during Prohibition was repealed, which allowed home brewers to go out and sell their brews because previously you couldn't do that. And slowly but surely, craft brewers started to grow and they started to gain market share. When the 90s, some of the big beer companies, led notably by Anheuser-Busch, really went after craft brews. And they really attacked them, knocked them down a few pegs, and a lot of craft brewers went out of business. But what has happened since then is that craft breweries have realized that there is a real power in working together. And they've realized that, number one, the quality of all craft beer will influence the perception of everybody about craft brews. Meaning, if I have a craft brewery and you have a craft brewery, right, you may have nothing to do with the production of my beer, but if my beer doesn't taste good, if it's a low quality product, if it's not up to the standards of what the consumer expects from craft beer, then that's going to impact the perception of your beer as well, because we're all craft brewers trying to carve out pieces of the market that is dominated by these really big beer companies with their more uniform tastes. They, of course, can compete better on scale. Craft brewers charge more for their product, but it's a more unique product. It's more local. So there are unique characteristics to compete on. But to try and compete against the advantages that these big brewers have, there's a real spirit of collaboration that has had to form, that for the craft brewers to work together to then grow in this industry. And I think it's a great lesson because, look, obviously there's competition there, right? There is a finite amount of beer being consumed, being bought. But there is so much of it that craft brewers don't have to compete against each other to survive, right? But if they think like that, and if they think that it's a zero-sum game, and if they think that they have to take, and get as much as they can, in the end, in the short term, that might work. But in the long term, in the big picture, it's not going to help. And you can see this in how a lot of craft brewers will deal with trademark issues. For example, there's an example in the article. I think it's Avery Brewing Company and Red Russian or something. I don't know. If you go to the show notes, primility.com/show/029, I'll have these details set in the show notes. But they basically both created a brew with the same name. I think it was Salvation Ale. And instead of just battling each other in the courts and going through litigation, they simply decided to collaborate on a new ale called Collaboration Not Litigation Ale. And you see this throughout the craft brewing industry, where instead of fighting against each other, they band together. And I think there's a lesson here for a lot of us that, obviously, for Anheuser-Busch, right, one of the big guys, now they're looking down and they're trying to compete against these craft brewers. And that's fine. In their position, they kind of have to, because demand doesn't seem to be increasing. They're losing market share, and that's fine. But for the vast majority of everybody else, this spirit of working together, this spirit of collaboration in any type of new industry is really going to help. And look at food trucks. Food trucks have banded together in many ways to fight against litigate or regulation, to fight against restaurants who don't want food trucks to have an easy time finding locations, getting permits, all of that. And and food trucks have worked together. That's in this article as well, to share staffs, train each other, work together for the common good. And so I think before we look to compete, before we look to take the other guy out, we should look to see if there's a way that we can collaborate together. And I've seen this even in my own experience. I host a show called The Assembly Call. It's a post-game show for Indiana basketball games. And I could look at the other Indiana websites out there as being competition, and we're competing for every last page view. And yet the other show that I host is Podcast on the Brink, a podcast for another Indiana basketball website. And the reason why is I've realized that by working with this other site Inside the Hall, it helps people become aware of my site, The Assembly Call. And by producing higher quality content online, we increase the visibility, we increase the reputation of independent online publishers by working together, which helps, it seems like, every single year for the independent websites to gain more credibility, to gain more access. And I think it's that spirit of collaboration that really helps there. And so the challenge today, today's Primility Primer, is to follow this lesson of the craft brewers and to take pride in having a sense of humility, right? Take pride in whatever you're doing, producing the best quality that you can, no question. It's got to start there. But then instead of thinking that you just have to compete, see where maybe you can collaborate. And maybe instead of just working and focusing on your own boat rising, see where you can focus on all tides rising and where the power of 1 + 1 equals 3. It's worked for craft brewers. It's worked for food trucks. It's worked for independent Indiana basketball websites. And there's a good chance that it can probably work for you too. So that's the lesson. Really look to find a way to collaborate, have that humility to see where your efforts can impact not just yourself, but somebody else. And I think this spirit of primility, as it's done in the craft beer industry, can help drive you towards success and greater long-term success by rising the boats for everybody and helping make it better for all. Thank you for listening to this episode of Primility Primer. Very much appreciated. If you go to primility.com/join, you can get on our email list and you will get our Friday digest. It'll actually come later this morning. I know that keeping up with a daily show is difficult. If you get the Friday digest, then you don't have to tune in every single day. Every week, you'll get a summary of each of our 5 shows, and you can pick which one or which ones that you want to catch up on. And then I also send a quick Monday morning email. It's 250 words or less. It's about mindset. It's just a positive way to start out the week, something Primility related to get your week off on the right foot. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me this week on Primility Primer. We'll be back Monday morning at 6:30 Central Time right here, as always, with another brand new episode. I hope you have a great day. I hope you have a great weekend. Stay cognizant of your pride and humility, and we will talk about this again next week. Wrist bump.